Hello, welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 766th New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Rose B. Simpson and Jessica Holmes. We are thrilled to welcome poet Andrea Abi-Karam here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we're speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host, Rose B. Simpson is a mixed media artist from Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico. Her work engages ceramic sculptures, metals, fashion, performance, music, installation, writing, and custom cars. She received an MFA in ceramics from Rhode Island School of Design, an MFA in creative nonfiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts, and is collected in museums across the continent and has exhibited internationally. She lives and works from her home at Santa Clara Pueblo and hopes to teach her young daughter how to creatively engage the world. Our host today, writer, editor, and critic Jessica Holmes' writing features regularly in Bomb, Hyperallergic, and the Brooklyn Rail, where she also edits the ArTonic column. She's contributed to numerous exhibition catalogs, and for nearly 2 decades, she's worked for the Calder Foundation, including 6 years as its deputy director. So thrilled to have you both on today, and I'll turn it over to you, Jessica.
All right. Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you, Rose, again from me for being here today, and to the Brooklyn Rail team for all of your support. I'm very happy to be back doing an NSE conversation. Carolyn, I thought maybe you could just put up the slides and scroll through them kind of slowly as Rose and I talk. And Rose, if there's anywhere you'd like to take a pause at any moment, let us know, or we can go back. But I thought I'd just start with a little asking you, Rose, just to introduce yourself to our audience and to people who may not be familiar with your work or who haven't seen your show yet. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background, your family of artists, and a little bit where where you're originating from.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, Brooklyn Rail. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me? We're good?
Yes, we're great.
Awesome. Let's see. I am in northern New Mexico in my ancestral homelands at Santa Clara Pueblo. I live next to my mom and my brother and my cousin. I live in my community here, and my studio is across the river, still on the reservation, but next to Española, New Mexico, which is a lowrider capital of the world. And let's see, I studied ceramics at RISD, and then I went on to get a MFA in creative nonfiction at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And I think that's important because it has helped me sort of define my intention in my work. I just opened a show at Jack Jamin Gallery called Road Less Traveled. And it's a culmination of almost a year of work, which was I went back and forth to Philadelphia to work at the Fabric Workshop and Museum, and I did a big installation there. So this is my studio work. So what I made in my studio here in New Mexico, and then also work I made at the Ceramic Research Center and USCLB in Long Beach. So 2 of the works were made in Long Beach, and the rest were made here in New Mexico. So, it's a big celebration of my year's work, right? Yeah.
And the road less traveled, I think, has a special meaning here in this case. Is that right? I was reading that you were thinking about new pathways for yourself.
Right. I think I think for us all during COVID and lockdown and the times where things really slowed down, I got to reevaluate my life in lots of ways. I think we all got to reevaluate our values. We got to reevaluate community. We got to reevaluate our belief systems, right? We got to really go within and I spent, I got to wander in the hills with my daughter for days on end, right? And that was a really beautiful time for me to realize how fast I'd been moving in my life and what I was missing out on because I was moving so fast. And how, work has been, I've been working, I've been a professional artist for over 14 years now, right? Full time, and I work hard. And to slow down and start asking myself like what my values really are and where I belong in my mind, in my heart, in my body, how I move through the world and how I can challenge that, right? How I can question what I take for granted and begin to sort of develop new methodologies of moving through the world. Right. And so the idea of we build new neural pathways by intentionally changing our manners, right? Our thoughts, right? So being aware of your thought and then, saying time out, I'm not going to think that, I want to build a new thought, right? And it's actually hard to do that because we have neural pathways that are superhighways in our head. And that could be belief systems, that could be negative thoughts or judgment patterns, right? Inside of our heads. So how do we start, going off-roading in our mind or get out of the car completely and start wandering on foot through our thoughts, right? And through our days and sort of try and be more intentional and conscious about the way we be, the way we exist in the world. And, it was mostly because I was noticing that about myself. And the more I noticed it about myself, I was realizing how our world in general sort of values groupthink in lots of ways, and how I can question this and sort of develop my own thinking patterns. I just keep thinking, as soon as I think I know something, as soon as I feel self-righteous about something, that's when I need to question it. Right? That's when I need to push myself further. Right. Because I want to be constantly in a sense of wonder. And if I'm not in a sense of wonder, then I've lost my way.
That's beautiful. Carolyn, if you could just go back to slide number 1 for a moment, because I think this sculpture, which is called Road Less Traveled, is sort of almost the starting point of this exhibition and kind of really speaks very directly to what you're talking about. Is that right, Rose?
Yeah, this is the piece that sort of was the beginning of my thought process. I have I draw all my pieces first, right? So I draw them all in my sketchbook, and then I have this desire to express something, and it begins with the drawing in my sketchbook. And this was that initial thought, right? This piece where I felt like I was being split in half, where I was caught in this binary, and I wanted another option. I'm like, I don't want to play fear anymore. I want something else. And so this piece is holding itself, and it has sort of black spots and white spots on either side, and then mud down the middle. Because I was like, what is that road? It's like earth. It's where we come from. It's the root. It's the core, right? So there's this mud path through the center of its being, and it's holding itself, right? It's holding itself, and it's being self-aware and loving and forgiving. And on the back of the head, I don't think you have a slide of it, but it has beads on the back of the head, and then I strung string between those beads. So the beads run on each side of the colors, right? And then I ran the strings back and forth to connect the two sides together through that mud road, right?
Yeah. Before I even knew the story of this work, when I was at the gallery looking at it, I noticed the sort of the pathway between the legs of the clay, and then the way it crawls up the sculpture. And I thought, oh, it's like it's erupting almost from the ground into something new. So I think that's something that's really, you've conveyed so well in this sculpture. And I think it kind of brings you into the rest of the show and the work. And Carolyn, you can go back to where we left off and keep scrolling through. And so maybe Rose, you could talk to us a little bit about your process with the clay, which I understand is something that you've developed in your studio and is unique to your work.
It's not super unique.
No.
It's inherited.
Mhm.
It's an inherited process. So it was a gift from my matrilineal line.
Mhm.
So my mother is a sculptor in ceramic, and different than her mother and her grandmother and her great grandmother, and on and on and on.
Mhm.
Back 70 generations. My mom picked up commercial clay, and she makes her figures with commercial clay and fires in a kiln. And so I watched my mom, Roxanne Swensel, make her figures ever since I was a little kid. And, you know, everyone in my community worked in clay, whether that was what my mom was doing with more contemporary styles or traditional clay, like all my aunties. And so I always thought that everybody's mom did clay when I was a kid. I thought that I have this funny story that when I was in school at the day school, one of the kids said her mom was the manager at Sonic. My mind melted. I was like, how is that possible? Where did she put her clay? You know? And so I didn't realize what a privilege that was, I think, until I went to graduate school at RISD. And I realized that speaking of neural pathways, that wasn't one I had to build. That was an easy one I was given. That was a superhighway in my mind, that you can do clay, you can make that your life, you can make it your living, and you can support your family with it, because that's what I witnessed as a kid. How my work differs is that I think, my Aunt Nora Naranjo Morse, my mom, my uncle Michael Naranjo, this incredible artist in my family, paved this road for me, right? So they created this foundation where I feel the sense of responsibility, where I need to honor what has been, and I also need to push further, right? But because of my contemporary experience of a kid born in the early 80s and growing up in the 90s in a bicultural situation where I was in the Pueblo, I was with my dad in Santa Fe, and I was experiencing, youth culture through the 90s in northern New Mexico, which is very specific, right? It's a very specific experience, but a lot of it was I don't like the victim story, so I'm trying to change my narrative here. But I think that we have been navigating a post-colonial stress disorder experience, and so we have gone through an apocalypse, right? So we're post-apocalyptic. This is it. This is post-apocalypse, right? And so, young people who come from an indigenous context are navigating the world using the tools that we have, and sometimes they don't work, right? Sometimes we lose our people. And so because of my own unique perspective of this experience, incredibly unique perspective of this experience, my heart has been broken. My heart has really hurt for experiences, for what I've personally experienced, and also what I've seen happen to my community just in my short life. And wanting so badly to make change, right? And so how can I feel like I have any agency in this situation? Right? Like I've seen things be really painful, and I want that to change, right? And so And I have this incredible tool that I was given in clay, right? And so I started to express my own experience as a 90s teenager. When I was at UNM, I started making graffiti characters out of clay because I was like painting trains with spray paint, and I was making these characters that big old hands and big old feet, and I would put them, I draw them all day long and everything. And I started making them in clay, and they felt personal and they felt true to my own story. And this was where I think my figures started being more abstract, or I was allowing the abstraction into my figures because I needed it to be honest, right? And I had a teacher at UNM who pushed me, and she was great. She knew my context, and so she was excited to see where I could take it. And it was the first time I really made a self-portrait, and it became so abstract because my identity as like a 19-year-old, right, was so complex and selfish in so many ways, right? That it pushed me to be, what was honesty, right? And how is honesty? Honesty can be incredibly abstract, right? And I mean, I went to school for creative nonfiction, and that's all we talked about all day long. What is truth, and so I started creating these self-portraits, right? Because I can't make anyone else, right? I can't express anyone else's experience, just mine. And the more true I can get to that experience, the more I think inclusive it can be. Because I think when something's too abstract, it can be exclusive. If it's too photorealistic, it's also exclusive, because then it's specifically someone and not you. And so just finding the happy place where I was like, what is my truth, and how is that linked to our existential human truth of what it means to be a human being, regardless of gender, regardless of culture, race, or context. And my context is definitely important to me, and my background, my foundation, because it influences my truth, right? But I don't want that to be everything, because then it's exclusive.
Yeah. I think, as you're talking about how your identity is tied into these sculptures, but also they're universal, I can't help of thinking of the sculpture that's in this show called ID. Carolyn, could you flip to that one maybe? Because I feel like that's a good moment to maybe talk about this piece a little bit. Which is one that was very moving to me, first of all, for its human scale. When I stood in front of it, I felt like I was having a conversation with another person right before me. And it's really one of those sculptures where you can look into its eyes, and it feels like it's almost speaking back to you.
So this one is actually, it is really narrative in a sense, because it shows my working style. So I realized that you asked me like how I make my work, and I went really conceptual. Actually, I use clay most of the time. But when I was in graduate school, I mean, going to RISD was really transformative for me. It was a petri dish of experience of getting to experiment on what works, what communication means, right? And so I pushed myself in that context to get myself out of my comfort zone. It was like, why do we go to graduate school at all? Is to push ourselves out of our comfort zone and find what's there, right? And so one of those things was like, I come from an environment that, I think Native arts in general have been historically sort of relegated to being acceptable, right? So there's a certain layer of pristine or smooth surfaces, and we can go on and on about that too, but that's not good or bad, it just is, right? So there's been functionality, there has been respect, right? So when you're working with clay, you don't want to disrespect that clay, right? And so you might want to honor it with turning it into something beautiful, so that it is, it exists as something that is beneficial to the world and is an aesthetic gift, right? And a spiritual thing. And so to push myself outside of my comfort zone, because I don't think I'm perfect personally. I don't think I don't ever fit into anywhere. And I've always struggled with, I couldn't fit myself into any box, and it was painful. And so I was like, what if I made my clay represent that process? Because if I feel like if people knew my stories, they would find compassion and understanding for me in a way that you can't get when you just put me in a box, right? And so I wanted to share my becoming. I wanted to share my story and the work that I put in daily into becoming, that I'm always changing, that this is a work in progress. And that in itself is fascinating and exciting and cool. And I can love myself more if I see myself for that being that's changing rather than an objectified or stereotyped thing. And so what I did was I threw my clay very thin. So the wet clay, I'd throw it sideways until it was very flat, very thin. And I'd work with that clay. And because it was so thin, you couldn't go back and fix it. And timing was everything, because it had to be, you had to wait long enough till it was strong enough to hold up the next layer. But it couldn't be, too dry, because it dries really fast because it's thin, or else you can't proceed with your piece. And so it forced me. I basically set the parameters to force myself to be okay with what it became. And to say, oh, there you are, or who are you? Instead of saying, I have a drawing or an idea in my head of who you're supposed to be, and I will make you to be that, right? And then I'll shame myself if it doesn't turn out perfect, right? The idea is there's no perfect. It is an act of wonder and witnessing to see it become. So back to this piece, is that the bottom clay, which is buff colored, is coil and pinch method. So it's hollow and the walls are about less than a half-inch thick. And then at the transition moment where it turns from lighter clay to darker clay is when I began my slab technique. And the reason that I use this for this piece is to return to that idea of this ever evolving identification of self, right? And so there's a mask. There's actually a disc of clay that's hanging from a necklace around its neck, and I just pulled out my ID card and drew my face on that ID because it's so surreal. Like, what is this? Right? We all have the social security number. We have our certificate in your blood. We have our driver's license, etc. That somehow becomes our identity, and it is very, very empty, right? And I wanted so badly to find the power in that transformative place, just to remind myself that is who I am actually. I'm not that face on my driver's license. I'm actually this evolving thing that is looking beyond.
Right. And can you talk to us a little bit about the jewelry and the beadwear that many of the sculptures wear? Because I think that they they characterize so many of the sculptures and are when you get up close, you can see that they're made from shell or bone. Talk to us about that process a little bit.
It's actually kind of cool. I've been reflecting on that recently because my work previously, I would adorn with power objects. So I would put intention into something and then put it on the piece, like, you're going out into the scary world and this is going to help you, right? And so it was a little bit fear-based, and so it was like all covered in junk, right? So some of those old pieces are just hanging with stuff, right? It was like, oh, I gotta bring all my stuff because who knows what I gotta be prepared no matter what, right? So it was like these warriors. I was really into these warriors that were covered in power objects because they were entering into the unknown in this post-apocalyptic world, and they had to be prepared for no matter what came. And then I had a daughter. And I was an only parent of a colicky baby, right? And she cried and cried and cried all night long. And I just had to stand there and bounce her and rock her. No matter how tired I was, there was nobody to hand her off to, right? It was just me. And in the day, I'd strap her to me and get back to work. And at night, I just bounce her all day. And I mean, all night long. And I found a new strength in me. And something I never knew. I was older. I had her when I was 33. So, that was older, sort of older mom. And I'd lived this very selfish life. And all of a sudden, what I thought was power or empowerment was not this, right? So this becoming a parent and having this ability to nurture someone beyond the furthest extent of what I thought was physically possible for me, or you're borderline going crazy, dude, and you still keep going, you get up and do the thing. And I was like, this is power. This is strength. This is something I never knew I could ever do. And you can't know until you know, right? And I started adorning my pieces with necklaces because it felt like a more feminine thing. And for the first time in my life, I felt like a woman, right? I felt like I was accepting and aware of my feminine side, or side of me that was mothering. It was a parent. And a parent isn't a warrior. A parent is a nurturer. And that nurturer carries itself differently, right? And so instead of putting, sort of objects of empowerment or objects of intention in certain ways, I just started adorning them with what I felt was self-worth and beauty, right? And I keep wondering when I'll start wearing necklaces myself, right? Like, okay, Rose, like you can, I'm growing into it, right? I'm growing into it. I'm trying to see it and be like, look, my sculptures can do it. Can you do it? So in the morning, I've been trying to put on some jewelry and go, hey, like, I can adorn myself and carry myself with a sense of pride and self-awareness, and self-worth in a way that I haven't found as useful. But I collect beads. I'm a hoarder of beads. I love beads. I love I guess I love the energy and natural being in natural materials. So stone and shell and wood, like they all sort of talk to me. And so these necklaces have pyrite and hematite and lava and shell and wood. And I stopped using bone so much because it's complicated. You know what I mean? I mean, shoot, like the clay itself is the flesh of our earth, right? So the wood is the flesh of the tree, so how different is bone really, right, than the other? So it's the layers of consciousness of what being is and what alive is and what we are taking and extracting and how we honor that, right? So I think about that when I use leather, and because it's closer to home, because I have a similar body as the animal, right? So it touches a little closer to home. So it's been interesting to talk to those materials and see what they're meant to do. But part of it is, wow, we're part of this. We are also natural resource. Our body is a part of this, and we are there, in relationship to stone, in relationship to wood, in relationship to lava, right? Like the idea of lava is so cool. Like the neck on Road Less Traveled is all lava beads, right? Like bricks. So it's this like road of passion, and the Aries fire, right? It's just pretty cool. I get all jazzed.
And I guess in the same way that that you select the beads and jewelry for all of the sculptures, there's also like a lexicon of symbols, the square, or the T shapes and the X's and the circles. Do those have a symbolic purpose for you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think everything is, every mark that I make has intention, right? Even if it's like a thought and then it's put on, and that's enough. It's like I meant that, it's intentional. And these 1-star beings are so the plus sign, what looks like a plus sign, is a star. It represents a star. So to me, that's guidance, right? It's like so direction and guidance and context, right? So if you know where you are, if you're aware of where you exist in this experience of life, then you can make better decisions, right? Like this one is just covered in stars, right? It's a part of this bigger context. There was a quote I very much like. It said, "Look up and observe the contextual field." And I love that. Like at night, you're just like, wow, we are so small. We are so small, and yet we are part of this wonder, just absolute wonder. And we're all affecting each other, whether I step to the left or the right. It's like butterfly effect. It's gonna move and change everything, but also we are also, everything we do is influenced by the stars, and the more we are aware of our context, the better decisions we can make, and also the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, right? I don't know anything, and I love not knowing anything, because wow, it's just absolute wonder. It's like fascinating, this world. Everything is absolutely brilliant, right?
And I think that's one of the things that you do so well in your work, is bring in all parts of the world come into your work, but also it seems like, and everything that you do has is equally done with intention.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I was thinking recently, like, I'm on to this next idea. Like I have a show in the fall, and Jessica Silverman Gallery in San Francisco, and I'm already so excited about it, right? but it feels like sculpting and making sculptures is like writing with a pencil. It's like writing a novel with a pencil, right? Or so you're not typing and it's fast. It's like you slow down. And I think that's vital, because I like to go fast. I like to jump to the next thing. I'm so excited. It's like, whoa, I want to eat up the world in all the ways. But it's like working with clay, you have to slow down and sit with it and be with it, and listen to it with layers. I always thought that was what the good thing about art school was. There's a lot of bad things about it, but one of the good things is that you have to sit and look at something for much longer than you would have otherwise. In that muscle of witness, you learn a lot, right? You can learn a lot when you sit with something longer than you are comfortable with, right? And so I think like I return to this process to force myself to learn and go deeper into an idea than like skipping past it. But I am very passionate about the things when it's so timely too. Like I'm really excited about an idea and I have to get it out, right? And then once I'm done with that, I'm done. Like I don't want to go back, right? But there is so much passion and intention in it, right? And so another one is the X's. So like I used X's, like you can see on this pot on the right hand side of the pot. And that's protection, right? So I make sure to have like, we have work to do, but we also need to be smart and cautious. So, right. So like, instead of being in fear, we just know we are protected and we do what it takes to be protected. And then we can proceed with the work that needs to be done. And so like every mark, whether it be hash marks or tracks or linear elements, they all have numbers. Like a lot of times the numbers mean if there's 5, there's 7, there's 4, there's 12, they all matter, right? So all those elements with my mark making matter.
That's interesting. I love hearing what you say about how you make sculpture, or, with the clay, you want to go fast, but then the clay forces you to slow down, because I often feel that way when I'm writing. Writing feels like a similar thing to me, where I just want to like get it all get it all out, get it down on the paper fast before I forget. And then I go back, and it's really, I feel like the writing really comes when I go back and start rereading what I spit out very quickly. I don't know, you're a writer in addition to being a sculptor. Does your writing play into your sculpture at all?
I suppose so. I mean, I think everything I do is an investigation, you know. Like I like that, where you write hard, you write fast, you write it down, because you know I have insomnia. So one of my friends always tells me, you should probably go think about that more, Rose. It was a joke. I spend more time thinking about that. I'm like, yeah, you should, huh? Like, no, you probably shouldn't. But like at night, I lay there and I go like, I get so excited about an idea, or like I start piecing together, and I gotta get up and like write. And then the next day I look at it, and I didn't get it right until I look at it again. I'm like, whoa, what was I trying to tell myself, right? And I look at old pieces sometimes, like recently with the Boston ICA exhibit, where I got to go and see all this borrowed work, like work that was on loan. And it's not that old, but it was like, whoa, what was that was cool. Why did I stop doing that? Or like, I didn't get it while I was in it, right? Like I made something and it was trying to teach me something, and I was trying to work through something. And then only years later, I was like, yo, that's what I was saying. And I was like, oh, is this what are people seeing things that I'm not seeing until later? Like, you know, which is really cool. Because, you know, it means I'm growing. But I do think that, like, I don't know. Honestly, I like making clay stuff because I'm the boss. Writing is like, I don't like editing, man. I'm like, ooh, that starts it like, you know, I know it's like a necessary evil, but there's something about the clay, and it is what it becomes, and it's a very feeling thing. So it's like, I feel this should be here, or like I'll put a necklace on a piece and it's like, no. And it's an obvious no, right? And so the editing process is more of a listening and feeling and an interrelational thing, rather than oh, my grammar's wrong, right? But a really good editor is a magical person, you know. I really, sometimes when I get a good edit, you know, and I'm like, wow, that's brilliant. I wish I thought of that. You know, so I respect that a lot.
I understand that.
I don't know if I answered your question. I went off.
No, that's great. You know, I think a lot of what you're talking about here is, you know, it's about plumbing the subconscious somehow too, and bringing it in a way that you can bring it out into the world in a way that makes sense somehow. And I wonder if we could look, while we talk about this a little bit, at I think it's Conjure 2, the head that's on the pedestal that opens the show, because I found this sculpture really intriguing. I spent a lot of time with it. Can you talk about, and it also is, you know, it has almost like a bit of a different feel than a lot of the other works in the show. So can you talk about this one a little?
I've been thinking about our capacity to dream, and the limits to that, right? So I only know what I know, right? And the information that I have. And I've been thinking about, what if there are possibilities beyond my wildest imagination? You know, where you know, where we're stuck in science, or where we're limited by our belief systems. There goes my birds. But I keep thinking that, you know, if I go into the feeling of something, then I'm not stuck in the idea of what that means, right? So I've been thinking about when we believe something and we focus on that belief where we can make it come true. And as artists, you know, we are creators, we are imagining something, and then we make it become, right? Like architects or engineers and people that like are able to visualize something and then bring it into the world, manifest it, right? And so it's like, wow, I can do this, but what if I could do this in a different way? Like, what if my intentionality had more wonder and it had more release, that I could release my intention or my prayer, my call to what I want to pull into the world. What if what I want for the world is limited? Like my wildest dream of what a utopian world looks like is actually limited, right? And what happens when we kind of let it go further than the limits of our imagination? And so the Conjure series is of that, and there are 3 thus far in that, just kind of like releasing that experience into a feeling of bringing things into creation. And this one is actually the wood base that's under the head is actually important because I am now currently building a new studio for myself. And this is a big deal because I've been basically using a portion of Flowering Tree Permaculture Institute's classroom space at my car shop. And then I have this little round studio on the side where I've been working for the past, I think 11 years now. And I'm kind of, I don't belong there. It's the wrong place kind of. I mean, I pay my rent by welding fences and fixing tractors, and I gotta hide all my junky cars, and it's kind of been rough, and it's great because my mom comes and she's like, "Are you hungry? Let's go get lunch." And so that's awesome. But I have to grow up and put on my big girl pants. So I'm moving to the backyard.
Oh, good.
You know? And I'm building a studio for myself in the backyard. And then my daughter can still run around. And it's like a family compound. So she's like, she can run from house to house and or ride her bike. But it's like I'm building this happy maker space, right? And it's just like, it's crazy because I'm allowing myself to have this like magical place to make, right? So it has like a big room for clay. And then I have a fabrication room for like wood and welding and steel and concrete or whatever I need to do. And then I have a car shop. And it's, so the point of the piece of wood under this is actually, I built the house with timber from our mountains here. So that's northern New Mexico pine, right? And so this dream I had of creating a space where I can be a creative person and I can be in my prayer and my intention is part of it. I had a dream to have a space that was my happy maker place. And this is it becoming. And so that pine, that chunk of wood is actually a very important piece of wood because it represents that transformation and the foundation for this new reality.
I was going to say it's like another new pathway, like you were talking about earlier with the road less traveled, like a new eruption into something else.
And it's actually paper clay too. So it's not a clay I usually use. So the rings are all clay. And I just kept spinning and building off and spinning and building off to create that kind of cloud. So it's so, experimental and exciting.
The other thing that I really loved about this piece is it's one where you can really get up close and look deeply into its eyes. And I think that the eyes on so many of your sculptures, I just had to bring it up because looking into like those voids was very moving to me. And I think really they become kind of, I mean, they're so intrinsic to these pieces.
I think often about the space within them, right? So they're hollow vessels. And the eyes are windows to their souls, right? So I think initially when I realized that one of our main problems in our American or culture is that we are unaware of the beingness in the things around us, right? That are the things we label inanimate, right? And I think like when me and my brother be playing in the hills as a kid, right? He'd pick up a rock and he'd throw it, and I would be like, that rock will never see its friends again. Right? I was like, maybe it liked the rocks that it was near for the last 50 years, right? Like, what? How did you do that so like heartlessly, right? Like, stop and ask the rock, like, hey, how's it going? Are you tired of these fools? Like, maybe we should like move you and you'll have a whole new adventure. Have you ever flown before? Like, actually have a conversation with it before you like think you should throw this rock. I used to have a meltdown as a kid. I was like, no, right? And this idea that like, we forget that our food is alive. We forget that, I grew up on a farm, so I made friends with the chickens and then we had to eat them, right? And there was this like, then we're sitting there eating your pets and it was the same like I planted the corn and then we're eating the being, right? You knew it was a life because you saw it become alive and have a life. And then all of a sudden it's food, right? And so your relationship to food is not objectified. It's not othered. It's so real where you understand sort of the cost of our life, right? And the cost of, burning fossil fuels and cutting pine from the mountain to build your studio. Like, I want to do right by that, right? And I think, plants and animals died for us to be here. And how do we make right by that? And not as a shame thing or a fear thing or a downward spiral of misery, but as like, wow, we could do this better and we can be more intentional. And I feel like my work is watching. And it reminds, and ideally it reminds that we're being watched. That's simple. Like when you walk into the hills, there could be no birds or animals or coyotes, nothing watching you, but all those trees are aware of your existence. And we forget that we're being watched, that we're, that those rocks feel you step on them, and it's like, we forget that. And I think that when we forget that is when we start being disrespectful and unconscious and not self-aware about how we move through the world. And we lose the ability to have an intuition. Because when we're not communicating with language, when we're communicating with a different sense, we build a new pathway, a new neural pathway of capacity of understanding our relationship to all things and how we move through the world in a healthier way. And that's my intention for myself, because I noticed that, when I start getting lost in the shallow, when I get lost in the shallows, I forget to use the road less traveled. I forget to go on the path that reminds me to use a different sense to relate to my experience of a human being.
When I was preparing for this talk, I've been reading about you and your work all weekend. And there was a quote from one essay that stuck with me, that you chafed at the valorization of fine art at the expense of everyday aesthetics. And I feel like there's something in what you're saying now about bringing, art into all parts of your life. That is something we've kind of distanced ourselves from. And I see a lot in your work of looking for ways to bring it back. And I thought maybe, even though it's not exactly part of this show, I thought we could perhaps just touch on the other pathway that you have in your work, which is
Speaking of roads.
Speaking of roads, Carolyn, if you wouldn't mind putting up the last slide, because I don't know how much our audience may or may not know about this, but also you are something of a car expert.
I don't know, it depends on who you ask. So when I was writing my thesis at RISD, I was looking for references for indigenous aesthetics or my own experience, because there's no all-inclusive idea, because there's so many different tribes, etc. But for my own experience of indigenous aesthetics, and I couldn't really find it. I used my grandma's thesis, her dissertation actually, to try and find examples of indigenous aesthetics, but I couldn't find much. And I actually started looking into Japanese aesthetics. So I was working, I had a seminar with a teacher named Yoriko Saito, who wrote a book called Aesthetics of the Everyday. And it was linked with like Nicholas Boryard's relational aesthetics, and just her seminar, which she was focusing mostly on Japanese aesthetics, where manner and consideration is the aesthetic itself, right? It feeds what you do. So like how you do something, it feeds what it becomes. And it was the most useful in trying to explain where I come from. And so I actually went to school to get a master's in creative nonfiction, because I wanted to write the scholarly text in indigenous aesthetics for other Native students that needed that reference. And I co-taught a seminar with my brother, Porter Swensel, who was the head of the Indigenous Liberal Studies program in Indigenous aesthetics. And in that seminar with the students and long conversations, we figured out that it doesn't fit in the language of the colonizer, right? We can't use those ideas of Foucault, et cetera, to explain it, right? So there I was already in the program. Like, okay, now what do I do? And Sherman Alexie told me, he said that I was already an artist, right? And he was like, just tell your story, write the long artist statement, and that'll be enough, right? That's it, because it's all related, it's relational, right? And that was exciting. That was that release of like, oh wait, this is it. I am living it. Just by doing what I'm doing, I am example of it, right? And so I went to school for auto body and automotive science and auto body specifically, which is collision repair everywhere else in the world, but in Español is lowrider building. And I loved it. I went to school with a bunch of young men from our valley who were very invested in their vehicles, and we helped each other fix up our cars every day, and it was a magical place to be. And they closed down the program on me, actually. So I fought to keep the program open. And there was a time where I actually was like, I'm going to run this program. I want to be the head of this automotive science department. And that was my goal in life. But the idea was that there is, a lot of us see our cars as like a refrigerator or a washing machine. It's a functional thing that gets us from point A to point B. And to me, growing up in Española, New Mexico, where cars became the reason to live, became, if you can cruise on a Sunday, when I was in high school, we didn't have cell phones. We would cruise back and forth on the main street and look for your friends, and then you pull over and find out where you're going to hang out, or just talk in a parking lot, park like this, or you just park in the middle of the road and talk to each other. And it was the way you connected. It was your social experience. It was your freedom. It was your aesthetic expression. It was your pride and joy, right? And so, it was a sculptural piece. It was an example of how you live in the world with intention, and how you value the way that you move through the world, right? So, like cruising from point A to point B, going 5 miles an hour, like you're not trying to get there. You're actually in the moment. You're very present. It's like it's almost a spiritual experience, right? I mean, you could talk to some people who do cars, and it's totally like, oh yeah, it's a spiritual experience, right? And so I built this car to look like a ceramic vessel. Like this is the closest I get to making traditional pottery. And it is an object of empowerment, and she became, my intention in presence and empowerment, right? And
Great.
yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, it does. I saw somewhere where you were, I think, talking about this car in particular, and you said that because it carries things, it is like a piece of like a bowl, like a pottery bowl or something to that effect. Is that right?
Yeah, I think the aha moment. Well, see, what happened was I had a 68 Buick Skylark, which is a Buick, right? Beautiful car. And I was working on that, but the floor panels were all melted out. So I was welding new floor panels in, and I needed a drivetrain, like engine to differential, like the transmission engine thing. And to find a Buick is hard, but a Chevy, this is a Chevy El Camino. And so this car was on the side of the road for sale. And I was like, oh, I'm going to take that car, put the drivetrain in the Buick. So the Buick with a Chevy drivetrain, and it'll run. And then I'll just flip that El Camino, like everybody wants the El Camino, but I didn't. And it was all side swipe. So it was all like one whole side was smashed in, and the tailgate was all broken. And so I was like, I'll just do the body work, and I'll pull out all the dents, and then I'll sell it, right? I'll take out the drivetrain and I'll sell it to somebody who wants to mail the lowrider, right? And then my mom, we were harvesting the field in September, in the end of the summer, and we had all these little kids, my nephews and nieces to help us, and they're short. And she was like, let's take that ugly thing to the field. Ugly thing meaning that car, and to harvest. So we drove it out to the edge of the field, and then we'd pick the corn and the squash and the chili, the beans, and we put it in the bed of the car because it was low enough to be a useful large wheelbarrow, basically. And when we pulled it back with the bed of the truck bed full of our harvest, it was that moment where I was like, wow, it's a vessel, right? Just like a pot, just like a bowl, just like our bodies, right? It is a mothering vessel. And then so then she got the name Maria after Maria Martinez, because Maria Martinez from San Ildefonso Pueblo was who started the black on black style. So then I actually painted a satin black. So I threw a satin black on the whole thing, and I taped off the pattern. And then I threw a gloss clear on top of it, and my teacher stood there, he's like, that's not gonna work. You're gonna be standing for weeks now that you messed that all up. And I pulled the tape off, and it worked, and I just screamed, and he's like, that was cool. So it was an experiment, and it worked out. It's really, really hard to wash. I don't recommend it, but for all intents and purposes, she does fine.
Well, Rose, I am in awe and admiration of your outlook on life, and this show is beautiful. I hope anyone that is watching today that hasn't had an opportunity to see it will go see it now. And thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. It looks like the chat is stuffed with questions, so I thought I would let a couple of people talk to you now.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rose and Jessica. Yeah, we got a great amount of questions here. So we're going to go to Alan first. Let's see, you should be able to unmute to ask if you'd like. Oh, okay. Great. So just give me 1 second. Let's see. Alan's question was, do you now or have you ever dug up your clay?
I grew up getting clay with my family and processing it, so I know how. My mom actually teaches workshops where we take young people into the camping for the weekend out in the hills, and then we go find our clay. So we find a new source of clay, then we process it and make the pots and fire it in the fire. And it's a really nice, empowering experience to go out into the hills and have everything you need to create a vessel to eat from. And so I do know how to do that. but I ask a lot of my clay. A lot of my pieces are quite large. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing. They just happen to be that way. But because of that, I really depend on the high fire clays. So I depend on them to be able to withstand the cone 5 temperature so that they're very strong and can go into the world and do their work and not break, right? So part of that is like, okay, I'm going to use these commercial clays in this kiln so that the work can last longer and be stronger, and I can push the boundaries of what's possible with it.
Amazing. Thank you for that answer. And thank you, Ellen, for your question. We're going to go to Belle next. Can go ahead and unmute if you'd like.
Hi, thank you so much, Rose, for sharing and for all your work. Such a gift. I was wondering if you could share, you mentioned about the cycles of like getting to feel you know something and then going back to zero, like I know nothing. And I was wondering how that was in the process of going from a non-parenting artist to a parent artist, like to having a kid. How was that cycle for you? I know this might be too big of a question, but I was curious. Thank you.
I don't think there's anything like becoming a parent, you know. And I remember thinking when I was pregnant, and then there's a due date, right? So there's a due date, like, and it's like the doctor sitting there and he's like, you're gonna go get into a car accident. How would you like to get into this? You're just like, I don't want to get into a car accident. Like, but I have no choice. It's like you're in this boat and you're like on this river and it's pretty chill, right? And then you're like just on a raft and it's just going, you're looking at the sides, but you hear the waterfall and it's like this massive like coming, and you're just like headed real slow to the waterfall, and you're just like, I have no choice, can't get off this boat, I'm just going off that cliff, right? And it's the best cliff ever, and I didn't know what love meant and how much I could love, and that's terror. That in itself is the biggest cliff ever of terror. But I think that an experience like that where it is like it's really humbling, and everything that I thought I knew and everything that I was like, oh, I got this and I'm tough and I got my crew and I got my nice car and I'm like, you know what I mean, all the things that made me feel some sort of sense of hubris or you know, all the things that all the crutches that I used to feel good about myself was like, none of this is going to help you right now. Like, you're in this by yourself, and this is the most terrifying thing you'll ever experience, because you're going to fall in love. You're going to fall and you're going to fall in love. And then the kind of fear of loving something so much is unreal. And I think that kind of like, you know, smashed flat down on your face is a good way to really question everything that you knew, right? And I think that really for sure really helped. And the fact that it keeps growing, and as soon as you figured something out, it gets bigger, and then all of a sudden the thing you figured out doesn't work anymore, and you realize that, oh man, I really messed up, and now I have to cop to all the things I messed up on, because I'm not perfect, and I wanted to be a perfect parent, but I never will be, and now I got to sit with that. And there's going to come a time where she'll sit down and she'll scold me for all the horrible things I did, and I'm going to have to listen. And all those things are, you know, I think one of the main things is that teenagers, and I was a teenager, I'm still kind of a teen, not gonna lie. I don't think I ever really grew up out of teenager, but for the most of my life of being a teenager, you know, I was really self-righteous and not really able to cop to my stuff, like not really to like say like, I'm going to look at myself and I'm going to say, maybe I was wrong and maybe I need to question myself and not be so self-righteous. And I think America is a culture of teenagers. We're all real teenagers, man. We're all walking around like we know what's right, right? And rarely do we stop and be like, maybe I don't know. Maybe I don't know what's right, right? And maybe there's a moment where I can listen and stop talking, right? And I think that, becoming a parent was that moment I had to. But so maybe I really was a teen mom at 33, dude. Maybe I was like, oh no, I'm not ready. Right. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah, I'm sure it had a lot to do with me finding wonder, because it'd be kind of interesting to go listen to like an interview of mine from like when I was 30 or 31 and then see if it changed when I was like 34, right? And be like, oh no. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Belle, for that question. Thank you, Rose, so much for your answer. I have a question, just looking at these works and hearing you describe the sort of figures as witnesses. I'm noticing most of them, I think none of them except for the one Road Less Traveled have arms, when you said the arms are holding yourself up, I think you said. And I'm just wondering about that decision. Like a few of them have legs, so I can see them maybe going, again, yeah, witnessing, maybe listening. But yeah, I'm just wondering about those arms.
This is what I tell myself, so it may not I may not have it fully figured out. There might be an editor out there who knows better what I'm doing than I do, but this is what I tell myself, is that I think that everything I include in the work is intentional. So that's why they don't have hair often, like, or specific genders. Like, doesn't matter. So if it's not part of like what I'm talking about, then I don't bring it in. And I think a lot of what I'm trying to figure out is foundation, is movement, is witnessing. And I'm trying to release doing. Like, I want doing to change from my empowerment has always been what I can do, right? So it's like what I can make, what I can accomplish. And I want to change it to how I be and how I move, right? So then it's about how you stand, how you have a foundation in your being, and then also how you see, how you witness, what kind of state you're being in rather than what you're doing. And I think that's often why I omit that. Right. And then sometimes I'll turn the arms into a necklace. And it's like, how do you just be beauty? How do you just be in a state of presence and awareness rather than the act of action? Right.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see, unless anybody else has a last question here, you can raise your hand or give you a moment. And if not, I am excited to present our poet today. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our events with a poetry reading, and I'm so thrilled to welcome Andrea Abi-Karam here today. Andrea Abi-Karam is a trans Arab American punk poet, performer, cyborg. They are the author of Extra Transmission from Kelsey Street Press, and with Kay Gabriel, they co-edited We Want It All, an anthology of radical trans poetics from Nightboat. And their second book, Villainy, also from Nightboat, reimagines militant collectivity in the wake of the ghost ship fire and the Muslim ban. And they are currently working on a poet's novel about crushes. Thank you, Andrea, so much for being here today. I'm gonna pass it over to you.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Rose, for sharing your beautiful work with us today, and Jessica for the conversation. I'm excited to be back at the Rail. So I'm going to read a new poem today, and I thought since this is a series about art and artworks, I would read this new poem I have in reference to some of Ana Mendieta's photos that I saw a few weeks ago at the NSE Chicago. And it's called Documentary of an Outline, after Ana Mendieta's untitled Silhouette series, Mexico, 1973 to 1977. Blood is thicker than gay cowboy gasoline mixed with the earth, vibrant and heaving before the crack of bright blue glaciers, airless, your outline filled with red, flowers that cast the stride of a run, the process of disintegration, arms branched mirror the vertical reach of trees rising. From a history of death, I am compelled forward through the maze to step into dark depths below sun, below skin. Cusp my outline is small, to sky, to rock, to mountain, to time, duration, especially in life so short, 38 years. Though your impression on the earth enduring, destination vein, seismic excavate, ritual blood to eternal green, my outline mirrored in sky skin, my outline mirrored in sky skin, my outline mirrored in mountain lust. Once rock, once air, once I absorb nutrients from the earth, thicken in froth, evolve air into atmosphere, refuse the earth's attempts to forget. I run my outlines into the earth, into sky, into the molten surface of the sun explosion. I leave traces, a life so short leaves legacy, engraved on silver gelatin, on clicking reel, on light through film against screen, projected into earth, onto sky. Light the path of Eurydice before she returns to hell. She was probably gay anyway, pulled away from the rest of the kinky leather dykes in hell, the frame, a flame. When my outline detaches from my meshwork, the center cannot hold. Our edges are temporary anyway. What symmetry is this? Every spindle all radiating out, radially out from the center and caught inward east. Toxic clouds always move east. As my outline burns brighter, I am blinded. The outline disappears and the impressions it has made on the back of my retina inverted goes dark. I carry it with me years later, a different set of outlines. Later is sunrise, close, mid-dark, or post-dusk, maybe 2, 3 a.m., when the ritual will not be observed. In the solitude of our disintegration, I form a new self and destroy the old by shadow mountain, gunpowder etching, accelerant drenching, utterly eye-catching, ritual against erasure, ritual of disintegration, explosion. Outline reversal, instead of carve, I fill the space with sand, hollow, solid, overcome gravity's destiny, pattern exterior, limestone, granite, ionic attraction, lattice energy release, face angular wind, northwest, not resting, but facing fully, no longer staggered, no longer flat, though arrows everywhere, directions everywhere except up. Why not up against? How my outline faces up to. Color photograph in the scale of the sun, the ritual of death lined in gold fabric, brachial asymmetry, finger vertebra, distinct shroud cloth folds like veins. I look down into your tomb and up at your silhouette iconography within all of branch subhalo, arc length incomplete, arm translocated laterally in space, outline discontinuous, unbound to static form, your branching endless. When I think of perspective, I think of physics and relative motion and the playful domino effect of bricks falling upwards in a noir city. I think of who is holding the camera, Mendieta, the visceral cartographer of the earth, capturing light and line, etched in sand, in flame, in blood, in fabric, in flower, in tomb, in ocean, in wire, in crease, maybe a part of her omniscient since the fall, and made sure to document outlines transient, her pieces not for a live audience, rituals for her, between her and the earth, her and body, her and death, her and the lushness of life, sky mirrored, cast down red hue, earth, cavern, three-dimensional maze beyond, unknown. Outlast, stone ruin, in silver gelatin, figure in silver, outrun predators against the backdrop of night, proceed into age of code and soulless chatbots with the grain and hum of 8mm resolution that lets your mind's eye fill the gaps in detail, the missing pieces, places, the blind spot of the camera, of the light through film uncaptured, failed to register. Without certain details, figures remain anonymous, outlines remain anonymous, a symbol in shroud, an icon on pedestal made not of gold, but instead of blood, Resolve the distance between self and lens, between body and earth, between love and violence. Resolve absence with an image projected on the wall, translated first from flesh, from earth, from gunpowder, from carving, from hollow, from flower, from film, from light. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Andrea. That's incredible, excited for that new stuff. And thank you, of course, to Rose for sharing everything you did with us today. And thank you, Jessica, for moderating so brilliantly. And we would also like to thank the Terra Foundation today for sponsoring our NSE program and making these conversations possible. You can view today's conversation on our YouTube channel in our archive shortly. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a poetry reading curated by Ted Reese. And you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much for today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Rose.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yes.
everybody.
Thank
you,
you.
Jesse.
That was
so much.
amazing.
Congratulations.
Beautiful
Thank you
program.
so much, Brooklyn Rail.
Beautiful
Thank
show.
you. So beautiful.
Thank you.
Great poetry. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Andrea.
Thank you, really, Andrea. Congratulations, Rose. Thank you.
Wonderful to listen to you, Rose.